One to Daf Yomi 1 week at a time, Masechet Bava Kamma. Today is our 9th class, and we are going to review Daf 56 to 62. And we were in the middle of a conversation last week. We spoke about guarding the flock in a certain way, the sheep in the pen, and you close the door, and and then the flock come out, and they cause damage. When are you liable and when are you exempt? So today we're going to start with the Gemara at the bottom of Daf 55 that tells us that there's two types of guarding, of shmirah. There is minimal guarding, which means you close the door or you lock something, and this is enough if it can withstand a regular wind. But if you double lock it, or if it's a super strong door, that is superior guarding. And we're going to see when you need to do what. The Gemara says that when we're talking about an animal getting out and then eating the produce or stomping on them, right, which was, if you remember, what we called shen or regel, right, where they get benefit from it or it's regular activity. So in that case, an animal is always mu'ad, meaning they're always seen as warned, right? Animals always eat and they always walk down the street. And therefore, for those animals, you need minimal shmirah, minimal guarding. And therefore, right, if you just close the pen door or you just lock them in a simple way, that is enough. The same thing. So then the Gemara tells us that for a pit, for fire, and then for shen and regel, meaning for the things that we just mentioned, again, you only need regular or minimal covering or blocking, and this is based on a verse. Right, and this is not Keren. If you remember, Keren was the ox. This is like aggressive behavior. Sheep don't have this kind of behavior, so this is not what we are talking about. Okay, the Gemara at the top of 56 tells us that there are 4 cases that cannot be prosecuted in a court of law, but you are liable for them in the heavenly courts. Meaning there's an understanding that even if you can't prosecute something, God is keeping tabs, which means that you're still liable in some way. It's just not punishable here. So what are these 4 cases? So all of these cases are things where we have a feeling something is wrong, but it's not that wrong. Okay. So what are these 4 cases? If you breach a wall and let out your friend's animal, and then that animal does damage, so you didn't really do anything wrong, but there was damage. Let's say you bend someone's grain towards the fire that's coming. So again, you didn't start the fire, you didn't cause the fire, but you are causing their things to burn. So that's similar to what we've been discussing. The third thing is if you hire a false witness for a court case. And the fourth is if you have testimony about some case, but you don't testify. So the Gemara just explains each one of these cases. If we're talking about knocking down the wall, obviously knocking down the wall is not okay. So Gemara says it was actually a rickety wall in the first place. It was about to fall down, and then you kind of helped it along the way. If we're talking about the fire coming towards the grain, it was an unnatural wind that caused the spread of the fire, right? Or maybe the item was buried inside. And therefore, it's not clear that, again, you're doing something wrong, but it's not punishable in a regular court. if you hired false witnesses, obviously that should be punishable. Here we're talking about you hired witnesses for your friend's court case. So not for your own benefit, but for someone else's benefit. And the last one is you were expected to testify on your own, and then you don't come and testify, and that's why, again, you're doing something wrong, but not doing something wrong. The Gemara then gives other cases that also aren't punishable in court. There are a lot of different cases that were brought on Daf 56. You can go see what the cases are. One of them is if you scare someone and you cause them to damage something. Again, you caused the damage, but you didn't really cause the damage. Okay, you might have, so then the Gemara asks, why do we have these four things, right? You might have thought that these four things, you're not even liable in heaven, right? But rather, right, the Mishnah taught that, that if an animal left the pen at night and caused damage, you're exempt, meaning you did what you needed to do. But let's say an animal, let's say, burrowed under the fence. So then, right, but let's say if the fence fell down and it didn't burrow, maybe you would be liable, right? If the wall was rickety, but the animal burrowed underneath. And here the Gemara gets into a very, I don't want to say complicated, but a very interesting idea or concept of what happens if you have a case, and we have seen this before in this Masechet, where the beginning of the case you were negligent, but at the end the actual damage was done because of an accident. Meaning you start off being negligent, but that negligence doesn't directly lead to the damage, rather it was an accidental damage. And the question is this person liable because it started with negligence, or is the person exempt because it ended in an accident? And that's a big machloket, whether or not you are liable. Let's say a person steered their animal, steered their friend's animal to stand on the grain and then to damage the grain. So it seems that you are liable. The Gemara says, no, maybe it's that you actually hit the animal to get onto the grain. And this way you are acquiring the animal when you move it onto the grain, and therefore you are liable. If a shepherd takes over from another watchman, so he is now responsible, right? He accepted responsibility to guard the flock. Or maybe that first watchman stays responsible no matter what, right? Because let's say I hire somebody to watch my flock and then he goes and hires somebody else. Who said that I trust the somebody else? I put that person in charge. They are responsible. Let's say the shepherd gave the responsibility over to his apprentice. So then the shepherd is exempt because that's a normal thing to do, right? A shepherd, I guess, in those days had apprentices. So it's understandable that we would accept that guardianship over our flock. Okay, next, let's say a person found a lost object and took it to their home to return. Right, so we know that there's a mitzvah, there's a commandment that if you see something that's lost, you need to try to find its owner. So now you have this object in your house. What is your level of responsibility to this object? Are you like a shomer chinam, like a person who's doing me a favor? Right? Meaning you're not getting paid for this job. You're just watching the item, and therefore, right, and you're not getting any benefit, and therefore you have lower responsibility. Or are you a shomer sachar, a watchman that is getting some sort of benefit? Because the benefit is that while you're involved in this mitzvah, you do not have to be involved in any other mitzvah. which means that as long as you're in the process of returning this item, you do not, let's say, have to give charity if someone knocks on your door, right? Because there's a concept that if you're involved in a mitzvah, asuk b'mitzvah, patur min ha-mitzvah. If you're involved in a mitzvah, you're exempt from doing another mitzvah. Of course, unless it's time bound, and then that's a different story. Okay, Da 57 tells us that if a person returns it to the police, that again, we're returning now a lost object. If you return it to a place that will be seen by the owner, so then you're exempt from responsibility, right? If you put it on their front porch and you know that they're home and that they go out every day, so then you are exempt. But if it gets stolen or lost, so then you're liable because you didn't return it to their hands, you just put it on their front porch. If they return it in the morning, right, so then you're not liable because, again, if I know this person goes to work and I know that they're going to come in and out, so then if I return it in the morning while they're still going in and out, I'm not liable. But if I return it at night or in the afternoon when they're already home, so then the owner's not going to see it, and then it could get stolen, and then you are liable for this object. Okay. It says that you need to return this person's property. You need to return it anywhere that is guarded, right? Maybe if I put it, again, let's say they have some sort of gate around their house and I put it inside that gate, so then that would be enough. Or even if it isn't guarded, then maybe it's enough, right? Maybe if I just put it on the front porch, that would be enough. And again, and then the Gemara says that you don't need the owner to know that it was returned if you put it in a guarded area, right? So if you put it through the mail slot, or you put it in a place where it's guarded, so then you do not have to tell the owner. If a person claims that the found object was stolen from him, right? So again, I found your object, I brought it home, I said, who lost a diamond bracelet? Then you come to me and you're like, oh, I lost a diamond bracelet. And you're like, oh, I'm so sorry, but it's lost, right? So now what happens, right? So the person who found the item needs to swear. Again, if you remember from Masechet Nedarim, we take oaths very seriously, right? So you don't just say, I promise, no, but you take an oath with the name of God. And then let's say he swears, and then let's say it's proven that he stole it, right? So again, right, I took that diamond bracelet. So then I would need to pay double, right? So if I pay double, that proves that when I took the original object, I am like an unpaid watchman, a shomer chinam, because again, if it was really stolen, I would not have to pay. If he claimed that armed robbers stole it, so then he's more like a hired watchman, because that would make him exempt, right? If he was, right, let's say I say, I found a diamond bracelet and then I get mugged, but right, and then someone comes and forcibly takes it away, then I would not be liable for that because it wasn't my fault. Okay, let's say you borrowed an animal and it breaks a bone or it dies, you're liable to pay for the loss of that animal. You're also liable if it got lost or stolen, because the borrower always needs to pay back, but they do not have to pay double, and we'll get to paying double in a little bit. If a renter claims that an item was stolen and then says, you know what, I'm not going to swear, I'll just pay you back for your item, and then we find out, then we find the thief, so then the thief needs to pay the renter, he needs to pay him back double of what he stole, because again, the renter already paid for the item. Let's say we last week we mentioned in the Mishnah that the animal fell into a garden and into the produce, and then the produce, right, the vegetable patch broke its fall. So you need to pay for the benefit of that soft landing zone. But if once it fell in there, the goat started eating all the cucumbers, so then you don't have to pay for that. If it got damaged, the owner of the produce doesn't have to pay, right? If your sheep falls into my cucumber patch, I don't have to pay you for any damage that happens, but the owner of the animal has to pay for the produce that it ate. Okay, Daf 58 tells us, wait a minute, how did it fall, right? Maybe it slipped and then it fell. Maybe another goat pushed it. In all of these cases, the owner of the goat is liable, and therefore he needs to pay for the damage. If it goes from one, right, let's say again, it falls down and it falls into the cucumbers, and then it gets up and it says, wait, there are also carrots here? Let's go eat those. Oh, wait, there's also tomatoes. Let's go eat those, right? If it starts going around the garden, so then, again, you might only need to pay for whatever's damaged, or maybe actually you pay for any benefit that the animal had, right? But if it left the garden and then it comes back and it's like, oh, I didn't realize next door there are all these yummy vegetables, then obviously you have to pay for both the damage and the benefit. Again, if the animal walks into the garden, so then you have to pay for damage also. If it starts off, again, as we said before, if it starts off with some sort of negligence and then it ends up accidental, as we said, there's a machloket if you are liable or you are exempt. We said that you have to pay for damages. So what does that mean, you have to pay for damages? You evaluate the difference of the value of the field with produce as opposed to without produce, and not the actual cost of the cucumbers. That's going to be more. You don't pay for that. You actually pay for that lower valuation. Okay. We also evaluate the land based on a larger piece of land. Again, land, right? Anybody who knows real estate, the smaller the land, the more expensive. Obviously, the larger the land, the cheaper. Now, let's say you do damage on a small area of land. We want to figure out its value. But we know that if it's a small patch, the value is going to be much larger than if it was a bigger patch. So what we're going to do, says the Gemara, we're going to compare it to an area that's 60 times larger than it is, and then you reduce it by a 60th, and that's the amount that you owe, right? You don't say, how much is this vegetable patch worth? Because obviously that little patch is worth much more when you're buying just that, as opposed to buying a big field, right? Meaning square, whatever the word is, not acre, but square, whatever, right? So feet or yards or meters, right? So the Gemara basically says that you basically check how much, right, a field basically of cucumbers would cost. You divide it right into this small area, and that's how much you are going to pay. We want to make sure that it doesn't come as an advantage or a disadvantage to the damager, meaning we want to make sure that we're accurately assessing the land, that we're not making it too expensive or too cheap. There's a story of a person who chopped down a tree, and then they said, well, how much are you going to pay? So they said, well, there are 3 trees standing there. Those 3 trees are worth 100 shekel. You chop down 1, so it must be that you owe 33 1/3. So here we see that you're evaluating just based on this small area. If the animal damaged the tree, so then you do compare it to 60 trees. And then, but here it was a person, and therefore you're going to evaluate it a little bit differently. Okay, Daf 59. If an animal ate a young or an unripe produce, right? Grapes, olives, or tree, there's a machloket if you value it to the value that it is now, right? We know that produce that's unripe is a much lower value than if it was ripe. So there's a machloket if you value it at what it ate now or what it was going to be if you didn't eat it, right? So this was going to become a fully formed grape, and now you eat it. So maybe we evaluate it as what it is when, how much it would be valued if it was ripe. Again, it means to evaluate it on the basis of 60. Again, we're going to make the area larger and then shrink it back down. Okay, so again, so the Gemara now says you actually, if it did eat from unripe fruit, you are going to pay as if it's ripe, meaning a higher value. If it, let's say, ate shoots, which are young trees, so then you pay the difference of the value from young to old. The machloket is if we take into account the weakening of the branch, right? What happens when it eats from a branch and now it weakens the tree? So too, if a man caused a miscarriage, we talked about this a lot last week, so then you subtract, right, any money that you would, let's say, the person would have to pay for expenses in general. Okay, let's see there's a story of of Eliezer Hakatan. He was small, who was wearing black shoes in the marketplace, and this was a sign of mourning in Jerusalem. They felt that he was being haughty, so they actually imprisoned him, and they said, "Who do you think you are that you're being so haughty that you're wearing these black shoes?" And he said, "Really, I'm a Torah scholar. This is what I do." And they asked him different questions to check if he was a Torah scholar. And one of the questions was about these unripe dates. And he said that you evaluate them based on 60. And then they realized really he was learned, and then they let him go. Please do not lock up people for their knowledge or no knowledge, or their ignorance, I guess. Okay, let's go to the next Mishnah on Daf 59. If you stack your produce in someone else's field without permission, again, you put all of your produce, your grain or your apples in someone else's field. If the field owner's animal ate from the produce, he's exempt because he didn't let you put your apples there. So if his goat comes and eats your apples, it's not his fault. If his goat got injured, right? So the person who owned the apples needs to pay because who told you to put apples in the middle of my field? If he put it there with permission, so then the landowner is liable, right? If I say you can put your apples on my field, I'm taking responsibility for those apples. So that was the Mishnah. Now the Gemara is going to explain. Rebbe holds that the landowner needs to take responsibility, meaning if you state that you are going to be responsible, so then you are responsible. Or maybe the case is that the watchman said, "Oh, yeah, sure, bring it in," right? So if a watchman says, "Bring it in," that implies that he's taking responsibility for the produce. Okay, the next Mishnah, we are now going to talk about fire, right? So if you're following, we did the ox, we did the pit, and today we're going to do fire. So the Mishnah tells us that if you hand fire, give it over to a person who does not have cognitive ability, right? Cheresh, shoteh, katan, which means, right, the deaf mute, the person who is insane, and the minor, right? So then you are liable in, again, the heavenly courts, because what are you doing handing a flame over to a child? You know that something's going to happen. But you're not liable in court because they still should be able to control certain things. If the person was fully knowledgeable, meaning an adult, meaning someone over 12 or 13 who has all their faculties, so then they are liable. If one person brought fire and then another person put wood on the fire, so then the wood guy is liable for whatever damage that fire does, right? Because of the wood, it got bigger. Let's say a person puts wood down on the floor and then another person comes and lights it on fire. So now the fire guy is responsible, right? Because he's the one who created the fire. Let's say another person comes and fans the fire, right? If you've ever been to Israel, that's how every Israeli does a barbecue, right? They light the coals and then they stand and they, I guess it's everywhere, but here there are a lot of coals. So they fan the fire. So then that guy becomes liable because he's the one who spread the fire. Let's say the wind picks up the fire and fans the flames. So then everybody else is exempt because the only reason it spread was because of the wind. Okay, now the Gemara is going to explain that our Mishnah is talking about when we talked about giving fire to a minor, or to a deaf mute, the Gemara says that's talking about a hot coal, right? You didn't give them a torch, right, with fire or a candle, right? You gave them a coal, which if you put it and you fan it and you put it somewhere, it will become fire, right? But if you handed them actually a flame, so then obviously the person who gave it to him is liable, right? Please do not give candles that are burning to a child. Or maybe you're exempt because the grasp of the cheresh, of the deaf mute, is what caused the thing to ignite, right? He's the one who created the fire, kilu, I would say, banned the flames or created this larger fire, and therefore he is liable. Okay, Daf 60 tells us that if you hand a cheresh, again, the deaf mute, if you hand him fire and you give him wood, so then you're liable because you're basically saying, here's how to make a bonfire, right? So then you're liable. If he fanned the flames and then the wind comes, if he did enough to move the flames on his own, so then you're liable. If not, meaning if it's only because of the wind, so then maybe you're exempt. Again, maybe it depends what kind of wind. Maybe it has to be very strong wind, or maybe maybe he was only breathing on the fire and that's why he is exempt. Okay, next Mishnah tells us, if you send a fire out, meaning you burn something and it starts to spread, and it burns wood or stone or earth, you're liable for anything that it burns. So now the Gemara explains. There's a verse that mentions different things that you're liable for if you burn them. And the question is, why does it have all of the things in the verse? So the Gemara says you're liable whether you are negligent or, right, maybe, right, only if you're negligent, or if you could have anticipated what was going to happen, so then you are liable. And maybe the question is, do you need to anticipate uncommon things? So the Gemara tells us that for fire, you are not liable for things that are burnt that were hidden inside something else, right? So if you hid your, I don't know, $20 bill inside your pile of grain, if I burn that down, I'm not liable because that's not something common in a pile of grain. You're also liable for anything that's standing, meaning animals, trees, and you're also liable if it scorched the earth, right? Again, earth is not normally burnt, but if it burns the earth, you are liable. It's not only the things that are in the field, but even the field itself. Since we're talking about fire, the Gemara now talks about different things that have to do with fire. Again, we know that fire could be seen, the image of fire is seen in a positive way, and also in a negative way. So the Gemara talks about punishment coming to the world because of evil people. There's a verse that talks about fire coming to burn the thorns, right? Thorns are the evil people, but it starts with the righteous people, meaning the righteous people are the ones that are going to get punished first, and then it goes to the evil people. Again, based on a verse that talks about fire consuming. Since we're talking about this, the Gemara tells us that you shouldn't leave your house. When the Torah talks about the Jewish people in Egypt, it says that they're not supposed to leave their houses during the plague of the firstborn, Makat Bechorot. They needed to stay in their house. So the question is, why did they need to stay in their house? So the Gemara says that once the angel of death had permission, or God comes to kill all of the firstborn, so now it's going to be indiscriminate at that point. So if you go outside, you could get killed, and therefore you need to stay inside. The Gemara asks, if you remember just before we said that the righteous people are going to die before the evil people. The Gemara says it's actually good because this way they will not see all the evil and the destruction that's going to come to the world. The Gemara gives travel advice. If you're going out on a journey, you should leave when it's light outside. And if you're coming home from a journey, you should come back while it's still light outside, meaning you should not be traveling in the dark. It's dangerous and better to not do that. Since we were talking about danger outside, the Gemara tells us it's better to stay in your home when there's danger outside, even if there's fear at home. I feel like this is a good Corona daf, right? So if there's danger outside, you should stay inside. However, if there's a famine, then you should go to another city to look for food. If there's a plague in the city, so then you should not walk in the middle of the road because the angel of death, again, has permission to be in the city and he's going to be in the middle of the road. Therefore, you should kind of stay on the side of the road. An explanation of this Gemara talks about taking care of your health, meaning if there's a plague in the city and you need to take care of your health, you should go to extremes, meaning be super cautious, stay in the side of the road, not in the middle of the road. If everybody is healthy, then middle of the road is the way to go. But if people are getting sick, it's better to go a little bit more to the extremes. The following is for animal lovers. The Gemara says that if you go to a city and the dogs are barking a lot or crying out a lot, it means that the angel of death is in the city. And if you go to a city and the dogs are playing and they're very happy, it means that Eliyahu Hanavi is coming to the city, that Elijah, the prophet, is coming. Here it seems to imply that animals have a sense of the spirituality that goes on in a city. Okay, the next story is relatively famous, where there were two students who fought over what their teacher should teach them, Rabbi Yitzchak Napcha. One of them said, I want to learn halacha, I want to learn Jewish law. The other one said, I want to learn agadata, I want to learn stories. And then every time he would start one thing, the other one would yell, and every time he'd start the other one, the other would yell. And basically he said, no one's letting me teach. So he says, I'm going to give you a mashal. It's like a man who has two wives. One of them is young and one of them is old. The young wife pulls out all the guy's gray hair because she wants him to look younger, and the older wife pulls out all the dark hairs because she wants him to look younger. And in the end, right, what happens to the husband? He's bald, right? So meaning you guys need to figure it out. I need to teach something. And his point is also that you need both, right? You need, right, a person needs their dark hair and their white hair. When we learn, we need to learn law, halacha, but we also need to learn stories, right, which are examples on how to lead our lives. And from there, he quotes a verse that you can interpret also legally and also more metaphorically. And the verse has to do with fire, and that's why it is brought here. Okay, more stories. Since we were talking about fire, so there is a story in Sefer Shmuel in the book of Samuel, also in Divrei Hayamim, about David, King David, who fought with the Plishtim, the Philistines, and then it talks about all his warriors, and then at a certain point he says, I'm very thirsty. If someone can bring me water from the well of Beit Lechem that's at the gate, that would make me very happy. And then these three warriors go and get the water, and then David gets upset that they put their lives in danger, and then he spills out the water. So the Gemara says, if you think it's about water, it's not about water. This is what happened. Basically, right, we know that water is a symbol of Torah. David had a question, a legal question, a halachic question that he wanted to ask the Sanhedrin that was sitting in Beit Lechem. And the Gemara gives us three options as to what the questions were. And one of them has to do with fire, right? Can you burn something? And if it's hidden, you save yourself by burning someone else's property, right? Or can you exchange your produce with someone else's produce? But basically, he asked one of these questions. And then on Daf 61, it says that he didn't drink the water. What does that mean? That David didn't want to exercise his right as king. Basically, the response was, you as the king can basically do whatever you want, right? You can take property, you can burn property. The king, you could do whatever you want, but regular people shouldn't do this. So he poured out the water, meaning he didn't accept law, and he was more stringent about himself, and therefore do this thing that he wanted to do. Next Mishnah, Adaf 61, back to fire. So if a person lit a fire in his domain and then it crossed over a wall that's higher than 4 amot, or it crossed basically like a highway, or it crossed a river, so then you're exempt, meaning this is not common for a regular fire to do this. Excuse me. So therefore, if it did it, you are exempt. So now the Gemara explains what is this wall? Does it have to be 4 amot? Maybe it needs to be 6 or 5 amot. Under 4, meaning 2 or 3, you are liable. Or maybe it's talking about the height of the fence from the top of the fire and on. Right? Maybe that needs to be 4 amot. So now the Gemara tells us that there are 2 types of fire. There's one that rises straight up, and that one you'd be exempt for because you wouldn't you wouldn't, sorry, 1 second. Oh, can people hear me or not so much? Yes? Okay. You can't see me?
No, can't see.
Okay. You can't see? Interesting. I see Aliza. I see you. Wait, hold on a minute. Let me stop my video. Let me turn it back on. Do you see me now? Oh, interesting. Yes? Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you for the nodding. Sorry, my internet seems to be okay, but okay, keep me posted if something happens. Oh, now you don't see me? Oh no. I don't know. I see all of you. So I don't know. Okay, I'm gonna keep going. Okay. So hold on, I got distracted. Okay, 2 types of fire. If it's bent, if it's going straight up, you're exempt because it means that there's no wind. You didn't expect it to move, and therefore you're exempt if it does move because it means that the wind took it. If the fire is already bent, so then it means you better watch it. It means that the wind is blowing it, or it's like traveling on the ground, and therefore you are liable and you should have watched it. The Gemara talks about the width of different things. So the highway is 16 amot, right? 16 cubits. That's about 8 meters. So then that is what would make you exempt. If it crossed a river, maybe it's 16 amot, maybe it's 8 amot, but you would be exempt if it crossed this because you wouldn't expect it to for the fire to cross it. Okay, next Mishnah. How much empty ground needs to be left between your property where you're starting a fire and your neighbor's property, right? So if I am making a barbecue in my property, right, I obviously cannot make it right up against your fence because maybe it'll go into your property. So maybe you need to leave 137 amot, maybe you need to leave 16 amot, maybe you need to leave 50 amot, or maybe it doesn't matter how much you leave, you're always liable if your fire goes to the next property. So again, the Gemara explains that this is all dependent on the height of your fire. Again, I imagine that this is it's actually something that's done here. The Arabs in our vicinity like to burn the weeds or the garbage, right? If you're setting something on fire on your field, you need to make sure that nothing else is around it so that nothing else catches fire. Okay, next Mishnah. If you light a fire on your property and it spreads to the neighbor and it burns his pile of grain. So if there were utensils buried in that grain pile, so you're responsible for those damages. This is according to Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says that things that are hidden, if they get burnt, you are still responsible. The sages say, no, you're only liable for the grain. You are not liable for anything that would be hidden inside. We actually had the next case before, very early in the daf. If a goat was tied to the stack of grain and then a slave was sitting nearby and the fire came and killed everybody, so then you're liable for the grain and you're liable for the goat because it was tied to the grain, but you're exempt for the slave. If the slave was tied to the grain and the goat was nearby and they both died, so now you're exempt to pay for the slave because now you're liable capital punishment, meaning you just killed a human being, so you're taken to court for that, but you don't have to pay anything because you're liable for the death. everyone agrees that if you burn a building, you're liable for everything inside, meaning we don't say that the things inside are hidden. Rather, people put things in buildings all the time, right? People don't put things in piles of grain all the time. That's why you'd be exempt for the grain, but liable for the building. Okay, so now the Gemara is going to explain all of this. So everyone agrees that if you light a pile of grain, if you light the fire in someone else's property, everyone agrees that you're liable, because what are you doing lighting someone else's stuff on fire? The machloket is only if you light something in your own property and then it spreads to the other property. Again, we said, so the sages say that you're liable for any tools that are regularly stored in the grain, right? So let's say someone put their hoe into, right, or their shovel into the grain. If that gets ruined with your fire, then you are liable, because that's something that's normally there. But if you hide, again, your, $5,000 in the pile of grain, so then you're not, the other person is not liable, because that's not something that's commonly stored in a pile of grain. Okay, last daf, 62. Rabbi Yehuda agrees that if you lend space to your neighbor and you say, you can put your grain here on my field, and then he hides something in that pile, so then the owner of the field is only liable for the grain, right? For the produce, because I told you you can put your produce here. I didn't tell you you can put something else there. If he allowed him to pile his barley on the field, but he ended up putting wheat on the field, right? Or vice versa, right? So you're only liable for what you gave permission for, not for what you put there, because I told you you can only put, let's say, the cheap thing, which is barley, and you decide to put the expensive thing. I don't have to pay for the wheat. I pay for it as if it was barley. Okay. So now, okay. Let's say a person, let's say a person kicked a safe, right? A safe where he hid certain precious things into the river. So now the owner can swear what was inside, and then you can get paid, right? The same thing with the fire, right? Let's say something was burnt, and it was hidden inside the grain. Remember, Rabbi Yehuda says that you're liable for anything that was hidden inside. So now the owner can say, oh, I had $5,000 in there. So when does he get paid back? Only if he swears that this is what he had. Again, remember, people do not swear falsely in general, and therefore he could swear and get paid back. However, right, again, with the safe case, the safe that gets thrown into the river, you could say I had a certain amount of money in there, but you can't say I had $1 million worth of diamonds in there, because that's not a normal thing that people have. So that we don't believe, but we do believe, if it's something reasonable. Okay. Okay. Next Mishnah. Let's say a spark flew out of a hammer of a blacksmith. So then he's liable. Again, that spark is going to cause damage. Let's say you have a camel. We actually saw this before. You have a camel with flax on its back, and it walks by the marketplace, and the flax goes into the store and is ignited by the lamp in the store. And then it keeps walking down and it lights all the stores on fire. So then the owner of the camel is liable, right? Why is your flax going into people's stores? But if the fire was outside the store, so then the store owner is liable, because why did the store owner put a lamp outside outside the store? However, says the Gemara, if it's Chanukah, then it is exempt, because again, you're allowed to put your Chanukah, your Chanukiah, your menorah outside. The Gemara says that this teaches that the menorah needs to be within 10 tfachim of the ground, meaning it's low. That's why the flax was getting stuck in it. Right. So therefore, if the owner should have put it higher, but if the mitzvah is that it has to be low, so that's why the owner of the store is exempt. The Gemara continues and says that you cannot put your menorah above 20 amot because then a person cannot see it. This is the same thing with the schach of the sukkah. If you remember, we did that a long time ago. And with that, we finished the 6th chapter of Bava Kamma, and we are going to start the next chapter next week. Be'ezrat Hashem, we will meet at our regular time. We have a few minutes, so if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer any questions. But otherwise, wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom.